Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It all started on one of those nights that didn't feel like it should mean anything, but somehow it changed everything. My mother had to leave town for a few days, and that left me alone in the house with my stepdad. At first, it felt completely ordinary, just two adults managing the quiet of the house together. But sometimes, the most unexpected stories begin in the quiet moments, when nothing seems out of place. That's when boundaries get tested, and decisions you never thought you'd make start to feel strangely possible. My stepdad and I were never particularly close in the way people imagine when they think of a picture-perfect family. But there was always a certain level of respect between us, a sense of trust that came from living under the same roof for years. He was in his mid-40s, calm, steady, and the kind of person who always carried himself with quiet confidence. I was in my early 20s, old enough to know better, but also young enough to still question what I really wanted out of life. Those details matter because the choices that unfolded later weren't made by a child, but by two grown adults, both aware of what they were doing, and yet somehow pulled into something that neither of us expected. The night it happened, a sudden storm rolled in. Thunder shook the house, the rain came down harder than I'd ever heard it, and the electricity flickered out. Darkness filled every corner, and with it came an uneasy silence. My room felt cold and unsettling, and I could hear every creak and groan of the house. That was when he offered, almost casually, "If you don't feel comfortable sleeping alone tonight, you can stay in my room." At first, I laughed it off. It sounded harmless, just an offer made out of concern. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the easiest choice. The storm was raging, the house felt heavy, and the idea of sharing a space didn't seem wrong in that moment. So I agreed. A simple decision. One that didn't feel like it carried any weight. But looking back, it was the choice that set everything else in motion. Lying there in the dark, side by side, the space between us suddenly felt smaller than it should have. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was filled with questions neither of us dared to ask. What do you do when comfort turns into awareness? When the person you thought you only saw one way suddenly feels different in the quiet? These were questions that kept circling in my mind that night. And so, here we are at the beginning of this story. A story about choices, about blurred lines, and about how two adults found themselves crossing into territory they never imagined. But before I continue, I want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where something innocent suddenly felt charged with tension? Have you ever noticed the way a simple moment can shift everything you thought you knew? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's see how many of us have experienced those turning points that changed the direction of our lives. Because that night, as the storm raged on outside, something was building inside that room too, something we both felt, but didn't yet name. And that's exactly where the story begins. The storm outside didn't let up that night. The wind rattled the windows, and every flash of lightning lit up the room in brief, sharp bursts. My stepdad and I lay there in silence, neither of us really sleeping, though neither of us spoke about it either. It felt strange, sharing a bed with him, yet not completely uncomfortable. I told myself it was just for the night, just until the storm passed, but deep down, I knew something was shifting. He had always been steady in my life, the kind of man who didn't need to say much to be understood. After my mother remarried him, I didn't know what to expect. I thought he would feel distant, maybe even cold, but instead, he was patient, respectful, and kind. He never tried too hard to win me over, but over the years, that quiet consistency built a certain trust. It was that same trust that made me agree to share the bed that night without a second thought. Still, I couldn't ignore the way my heartbeat quickened when I realized how close we actually were. The truth is, I noticed things about him that I never admitted out loud. The way he carried himself, calm and collected, like nothing could really shake him. The way he would listen when I spoke, not just hearing my words, but actually paying attention. It wasn't the kind of attention that felt inappropriate, it was more like he genuinely valued what I had to say. And sometimes, when someone sees you that way, it changes how you see them too. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, it was quiet, almost delicate, but impossible to ignore. I shifted slightly, trying to make myself comfortable, and I could sense that he noticed. The silence between us grew heavier, as if we were both aware of the unspoken questions lingering in our minds. I thought about my mother, how she trusted him completely, how she probably never worried about nights like this. That thought made me hesitate. I knew what was right and what wasn't, but I also couldn't deny the strange pull I felt in that moment. It wasn't about doing something reckless. It was about trying to understand why I suddenly felt so aware of him, why this night felt so different from all the others we had spent under the same roof. The storm outside roared louder, almost as if it were echoing the conflict inside me. I closed my eyes, telling myself to sleep, but my mind refused to rest. I wondered if he was awake too, lying there with his own thoughts. Did he feel the same tension I felt? Did he notice how the air between us had changed? Or was it just me overthinking, caught in the haze of a restless night? That uncertainty was enough to keep me from finding peace. Every little sound, every shift of the mattress, made me hyper-aware of his presence. It wasn't what he did, it was simply the fact that he was there, just inches away. Sometimes, closeness doesn't need words to be felt. Sometimes, the quiet is louder than any conversation could be. The hours dragged on, and I knew this was only the beginning. What started as a simple decision, agreeing to share a bed for one night, was becoming something else entirely. The questions in my head wouldn't leave me alone. Was this just a fleeting moment brought on by the storm, or was it revealing something that had been there all along? And so, as the night carried on and the rain continued to fall, the story between us was just beginning to take shape. The tension hadn't broken yet, but it was there, growing, waiting, daring us to see what would happen next. The storm eventually faded into the early hours of the morning, but the quiet that followed felt even heavier. When I opened my eyes, the room was still dim, the gray light of dawn seeping through the curtains. My stepdad was awake too, lying still, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as if he was deep in thought. For a moment, I wondered if he had slept at all. There was something different in the air, like the night had left behind a trace of its weight that neither of us could shake. I tried to act normal, shifting away slightly and pretending to stretch, but the truth was I didn't feel normal. My heart raced every time I caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of my eye. The reality of sharing a bed wasn't shocking anymore, it was the fact that it suddenly mattered. What had been harmless before now felt like a secret we were both carrying, even though nothing had actually happened. He finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Did you sleep at all?" His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an edge to it that made me think he was asking more than just the obvious. "Not really," I admitted with a small smile, trying to keep the mood light. The storm kept me up. But that wasn't the full truth, and I think he knew it. His glance lingered for a second longer than usual before he nodded, saying nothing else. That small pause was enough to stir the unease in my chest. The rest of the day should have felt ordinary. We went about our routines. He made coffee. I scrolled through my phone. The house felt quiet without my mother's presence. Yet underneath it all, there was this constant awareness, like we were both pretending things were exactly as they had always been, while knowing they weren't. Later in the afternoon, another layer of conflict began to form. My mother called to check in, her voice cheerful, asking how everything was at home. I could hear the warmth in his tone as he spoke to her, reassuring her that everything was fine. But while I listened, a strange thought crossed my mind. Was I already keeping something from her? Nothing had happened, yet I felt guilty. It was as though the simple act of sharing that space with him had created a secret between us, one she didn't know about. That guilt clashed with something else I didn't want to admit, a growing curiosity. Why did it feel different to be around him now? Why did the small gestures, like the way he handed me a mug of coffee or held the door open, feel charged with unspoken meaning? Was I imagining it, or was he quietly aware of it too? The inner conflict grew stronger as the hours passed. Every little detail seemed amplified. The way his eyes lingered when I laughed at something on my phone. The way I noticed the calm steadiness in his presence, more than I ever had before. It was a mix of confusion and pull, like I was standing on the edge of something I shouldn't step into, but couldn't stop thinking about. That night, I lay awake again, this time in my own room, staring at the ceiling. The storm had passed, but the silence was louder than ever. My thoughts spun in circles. Was this just me, caught in a moment of weakness, or was something deeper happening between us? The unanswered questions were becoming harder to ignore. As the story moves forward, the real conflict isn't just about what might happen, it's about what choices we make when we're caught between what feels right and what feels undeniable. And that's where I'll leave you for now. The next evening carried a weight that neither of us wanted to acknowledge, but it was there. The storm had passed, yet the quiet inside the house felt even louder than the rain ever had. Every sound, his footsteps down the hallway, the clink of dishes in the sink, the way the floorboards creaked, echoed differently now. I couldn't tell if it was just me imagining it, or if he felt it too. Dinner was simple, nothing out of the ordinary, yet the air between us was thick. He asked about my day, and I answered with short replies, careful not to reveal too much of the storm inside my own thoughts. At one point, our eyes met across the table, and neither of us looked away quickly enough. That moment lingered, stretching longer than it should have, before I broke the silence with a nervous laugh. He smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that carried unspoken meaning. Later that night, I found myself restless again. My room felt too big, too empty, and the quiet pressed against me in waves. I could hear him moving in the living room, the faint sound of the television playing low, though I doubted he was really watching. Something inside me pulled me to step out, as if the distance between our rooms wasn't just physical, but part of the conflict itself. I walked into the living room, pretending I only came for a glass of water. He glanced up, surprised, but didn't question it. Instead, he patted the space next to him on the couch. I hesitated for a moment, then sat down, telling myself it was harmless. But the closeness returned instantly, stronger than it had been before. We didn't say much. The TV flickered with light, filling the silence, but the unspoken words were louder than anything else. Every small shift, every breath, felt amplified. I caught myself watching the way his hand rested against the couch, steady and calm, and I wondered what would happen if I let myself close that tiny space between us. The tension built with every second that passed. Neither of us moved, but neither of us left. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one more step would change everything. My heart raced, torn between reason and the undeniable pull of the moment. Just then, the phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen, shattering the stillness in the room. He answered quickly, his voice calm, steady, as though nothing unusual was happening at all. I sat there, pulse pounding, trying to breathe normally, but inside, everything was unraveling. The call ended, and the silence returned, heavier than before. The question hung between us, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. What happens next? The silence after that phone call felt like it stretched forever. I could still hear my stepdad's calm voice echoing in my mind, the way he spoke to my mother as if nothing unusual was happening. Yet the moment he set the phone down, the weight of everything we weren't saying came crashing back in. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for one of us to make the next move. I thought maybe we would just brush it off, retreat into our separate rooms, and pretend the evening had been ordinary. But then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered again. For a second, the room went dark before the power returned. It was such a small thing, but in that instant of darkness, I felt how fragile the line was between control and giving in to what we both felt. When the lights came back, our eyes met, and I could see something in his expression, a mix of hesitation and certainty that mirrored my own. Just when I thought the tension couldn't get any heavier, a sudden knock came at the front door. Both of us froze. At that hour, we weren't expecting anyone. My heart raced as he got up to answer, and I followed, curiosity burning through the unease. When he opened the door, it was one of his old friends from work, standing there, drenched from the rain that had started again. Apparently, his car had broken down nearby, and he needed a place to wait until a tow truck could come. The unexpected visitor shifted everything. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the house wasn't just between the two of us anymore. His friend's presence was casual and friendly, but for me, it added another layer to the tension. I couldn't stop wondering if he could sense anything beneath the surface, if he noticed the way I moved around the room, careful and cautious, or the way my stepdad's eyes seemed to follow me when I spoke. We sat in the living room together, making small talk while the rain pounded outside. The friend laughed, joked, and filled the silence with easy conversation, but to me, every minute felt like a test. It was harder to hide the unspoken conflict when someone else was there to witness it. I kept thinking, what if he sees through it? What if he mentions something to my mother later? The stakes suddenly felt much higher, like the universe was forcing us to recognize that what we were dancing around could no longer be ignored. After about an hour, the tow truck finally arrived. The friend thanked us, gave a quick wave, and disappeared into the stormy night. The moment the door shut, the house was quiet again, but the interruption had changed something. The secrecy of what we felt now carried a sharper edge, because it wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the risk of being discovered, the possibility of someone else noticing. That realization made the air between us almost unbearable. I couldn't shake the thought that the knock on the door hadn't just been coincidence. It was like a warning, a reminder of how quickly everything could spiral if we weren't careful. Yet at the same time, the intensity of that reminder only made the pull stronger. If we were already crossing lines emotionally, what was stopping us from going further? That night, when I finally went back to my room, I knew sleep would be impossible. My mind kept replaying the way his eyes lingered, the way his voice softened when he spoke, the way the sudden interruption had shaken us both. The stakes were higher now, the risks greater, but so was the pull I felt toward him. And that's where the real suspense lies, not just in the storm outside or the silence inside, but in the question of how much longer we could carry this tension before something gave way. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle the next night, but inside the house, the tension had reached its peak. Days of silence, unspoken thoughts, and stolen glances had built up into something neither of us could ignore anymore. It wasn't just about one storm or one night. It was about everything that had grown between us in the quiet moments, all the emotions we had both been pretending not to feel. I found myself standing in the kitchen, unable to focus on anything. He walked in, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No words, no excuses, just the weight of everything we had held back. The silence was louder than ever, and I knew this was the breaking point. My chest tightened as he stepped closer, his expression conflicted yet steady, like he was done running from it. "You feel it too," he said quietly, almost like a confession. I froze, because it was the first time either of us had admitted it out loud. Hearing him say it made everything real. I nodded, barely able to breathe, my heart pounding as though it was about to break free from my chest. In that instant, the boundary we had been clinging to felt thinner than ever. The air between us seemed to crackle with the choice we were both about to make. But just as the moment reached its height, the sound of the front door unlocking shattered everything. We both turned at once, shock flooding through us. My mother walked in, suitcase in hand, smiling as though nothing had changed. She had come home a day early, completely unaware of the storm that had been brewing inside her own house. The timing was too sharp, almost unreal. 1 second longer, and everything might have been different. Instead, the tension dissolved into silence, replaced by a rush of guilt and relief tangled together. We exchanged one final look, a look that held every unspoken word, every secret feeling, and then stepped back, putting the distance between us that we had been on the verge of erasing. That was the twist neither of us expected. Fate had decided for us, pulling us back from the edge just as we were about to fall. The conflict wasn't solved in the way either of us imagined, but in that instant, it was clear. Some lines aren't crossed not because the feelings aren't real, but because life refuses to let them be. And yet, even as my mother hugged me and began talking about her trip, I couldn't shake the lingering thought. What if she had been just 5 minutes later? What if fate hadn't intervened? Would we have taken that step we both knew was waiting? That's the question I'll leave with you. Do you believe fate protects us from choices we shouldn't make, or does it simply delay them? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the ending isn't an answer, it's another question waiting to be explored. When my mother returned that night, everything inside me shifted. The tension that had nearly broken spilled into silence, and I realized how fragile the line between choices and consequences truly was. My stepdad and I went back to acting normal, moving through the motions of everyday life as though nothing had happened. But deep down, both of us carried the memory of that moment when everything almost changed. It wasn't about denial anymore. It was about knowing that we had stood on the edge of something we couldn't take back. Over the next few days, I found myself reflecting more than ever. I kept replaying the look in his eyes, the quiet honesty in his voice when he said, "You feel it too." That admission alone had changed everything, because once words are spoken, they can't be unsaid. But at the same time, my mother's early return had been a kind of mercy. It stopped us before we made a choice that might have broken more than just trust. It could have torn apart everything we had as a family. The subplot of my guilt toward my mother weighed heavier now. Every smile she gave, every story she shared about her trip, reminded me of how much she trusted both of us. She didn't notice anything unusual, which only made the secret harder to carry. In a way, that secret became the quiet resolution of the story. We didn't act on what we felt, but we knew it was there. We chose to keep it buried, not because it wasn't real, but because some truths are too dangerous to live out. With time, the tension between my stepdad and me softened. We didn't speak of that night again, but there was an unspoken understanding. Respect replaced the pull of temptation, and distance became a way of protecting not just ourselves, but my mother too. I realized that love, romance, and relationships aren't always about giving into emotions. They're also about the choices you make to protect what matters most. Looking back, I see the story as more than just a near mistake. It was a lesson in self-control, in understanding how fragile boundaries can be, and in recognizing that not every desire is meant to be acted on. Sometimes, life gives us a twist that feels like punishment, but later, you realize it was protection. That's what my mother's early return was, a twist of fate that saved us from ourselves. And now I want to leave this with you. If you were in my position, would you have let fate decide, or would you have made the choice yourself? Do you believe some moments are meant to stay as almost instead of what if? Share your feelings in the comments. And if you'd like to see this story continued in a sequel, let me know. I'd love to explore what could happen next. Summary: this is the true story of one stormy night that changed everything. Left alone while my mother was away, I agreed to share a bed with my stepdad, a choice that opened the door to feelings neither of us expected. What began as comfort grew into undeniable tension, tested by fate, interrupted by unexpected twists, and nearly pushed to the breaking point. But in the end, a sudden turn saved us from crossing a line that could never be undone. 2.